Hey, this is Matt Wimmer from Brody Precision, and welcome back to our Virtual Machines and the Cloud video series. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the next step, and that is an introduction to cloud computing. So, what is the cloud? You've probably heard this marketing buzzword everywhere. Everyone claims that they're a cloud provider or their services in the cloud. And while it is a marketing word, it does have some meaning behind it. So what they typically mean is that their servers, when they say they're running in the cloud, it means that their servers are running in a data center somewhere and they're connected to the internet. There are a very small number of providers, cloud providers, that provide a vast majority of the cloud computing that is available on the internet. And those two main providers are Microsoft Azure and Amazon Web Services. And yes, that's the same Amazon that you buy everything from online. A very, very large segment of the company is built around these Amazon Web Services. And they've got, as you can see, both of these companies have data centers and regions. So these aren't even necessarily individual data centers. There are locations where they have multiple data centers. They've got them all over the world. And you have the ability to pick where you want your servers to be, and we'll get into more detail in further videos, but just as a general idea of what the cloud means, that's what it is. You've got services that are running in a data center somewhere, and they're connected to the internet. So why would you use the cloud? Why wouldn't I just use that server that I have in the closet already, or that old computer that I could plug into the network here at the office or something like that? Well, the number one reason in my mind is that there's no physical hardware to manage, right? So if you spin up a virtual machine in the cloud, say with Amazon Web Services, you're not running an actual physical piece of hardware. Your server is running virtually on potentially multiple pieces of hardware. So you have all the benefits of being in a data center, right? You have access to their infrastructure, and you have access to their UPS power and their super high-speed internet and their internet that's redundant along with their power and all those things. But you don't have to worry about managing the physical hardware that virtual machine is running on. This if you've managed hardware physical machines before, you know that this tends to be a pain point. Physical hardware breaks, right? Spinning drives break, fans break, power supplies break. All of these things eventually happen. You don't have to worry about that at all when you're using a cloud provider. And there's none of the negatives, right? So you get all the positives of being virtual and being in a data center, but you don't have any of the negatives of actually, making sure that all of these things work. You pay a little bit and you get it. So you get access to resources you might not have otherwise. These could be hardware resources. That could be CPU, maybe power that you wouldn't have access to otherwise or wouldn't be able to afford otherwise. It could be memory. It could be hardware. It could be disk space. And it could be internet speeds and internet reliability. So maybe you have a high-speed connection at your office, but it goes down a lot. At a data center from Amazon, say, you're not going to have those issues because if there was an issue with Amazon Web Services, well, you might not be able to get to Netflix either. And you also have the ability to be super flexible. So you don't have a piece of hardware that you're spending all this money on right up front. You could turn off your virtual machine when you're not using it, or when you're testing something, you could spin one up and then turn it off. You only pay for what you use. So that gives you a ton of flexibility. Plus, if you outgrow what you have, you could change the virtual machine size that you're on and, throw in a bigger hard drive or get a faster CPU or get more memory. That's all available to you when you're using one of these cloud providers. So, as I mentioned, there are two main players in the cloud space, Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure. There are a couple other players as well, like Linode, which is based out of Philadelphia, and DigitalOcean, which is based out of New York. These are also very large players, but one caveat is that they don't offer Windows as an operating system on their virtual machines, which obviously we're going to want most of the time for things like Niagara supervisors. So Amazon Web Services and Microsoft Azure have those options available to us. It's very easy to install. You just select an image that you want Microsoft Windows installed on, and then they'll bill you a little bit extra for your usage so that you get your actual license for Windows as well. So, Amazon Web Services. What is Amazon Web Services? Amazon Web Services is a huge variety of services that Amazon offers to anyone that's willing to pay. So I've broken out here a couple of the main ones that we're going to use, but know that there are a ton of other ones that you potentially can make use of yourself, and a vast majority of them you probably would never touch. So the first one is EC2. This is virtual machines. This is our compute. Think of this as your CPU and memory for your computer. But if you know anything about computers, you know you're missing one main piece there, one important piece, and that's your storage, your hard drive. So that's where EBS comes in, elastic block storage, and that's your storage for your virtual machines. The other big one that we'll make use of is Route 53, that lets you purchase domain names and do DNS for those domain names. And you can route those things around as you need to your variety of services that you might be using in Amazon Web Services or other places. And then S3 is what's known as block storage. So this is if you had some files that you wanted to back up or you wanted to make easily available to customers. You can upload just a file and get a link that you could give out to people that is very fast to download from, and then not have to worry about things like operating systems and stuff like that in order to make that object available to people. And then S3 Glacier is the same thing as S3, but it's cold storage. So it makes it cheaper to hold more data, but it is a little bit slower to pull that data up. And Amazon Web Services is a business, obviously, so there are fees for everything that I just talked about. And some of those fees are a little bit complicated to calculate because things like bandwidth can increase your cost and stuff like that. And that's a flexible thing, right? Depending on how much data you're putting in and out of your server, you might be paying more money. But Amazon does give you a whole bunch of free instances and versions of all these products that you can use when you first sign up by clicking the link here on this slide. So if we talk a little bit more about Amazon EC2, Amazon EC2 is your virtual machine in the cloud, but it's only the compute, like I mentioned before. So it's your CPU and your memory, and it's typically not your hard drive. Now, there are certain specialty tiers of EC2 where a hard drive might be bundled in as well, but typically that's a separate piece, and you're using block storage for that. The server specs are picked to suit your exact needs, and you can upgrade them later with just a few clicks, and we'll show what this whole process looks like in future videos. And then Windows Server licenses are included with your fees if you want to run Windows, and if you want to run Linux, there's no additional fee to run Linux, as Linux is typically open source, and you can just choose an image that has those things and not have to pay additional fees. So elastic block storage, like we mentioned before, is our hard drive for our EC2 instance. We can make it as big as we want to or as small as we want to, and you can set these block storage items up so that they are backed up automatically and sent to S3 so that you could pull them later if you wanted to, and give yourself a little bit of peace of mind. And you pay by the gigabyte per month. Route 53 is pretty straightforward. It lets you register domain names and lets you set up your DNS for those domain names. And basically what DNS does in this case is it tells the client computer, the computer that's going to those domain names, where the server that they're going to talk to is actually located at. And we'll show this more in depth later. And as I mentioned before, you've got S3 and S3 Glacier. These are file storage in the cloud. Glacier performs the same function as S3, but at a slower retrieval time. So potentially in the data center, the files are on tape, maybe. So a robot has to go and grab a tape or something to pull up the files for you in order to get them. So it's great for archives. It's much cheaper, but it's going to be a little bit longer to pull up the file for you. So that does it for this video, a brief introduction on virtual machines and the cloud, and mainly the cloud. In our next video, we'll be taking a little bit more in depth at Amazon Web Services and setting up everything you need to make your cloud instance work. Thanks.